You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
All right, wrapping up the week here on Mission Log Engage. I'm John.
I'm Norm.
And
how are you, John?
Hey, I'm
Happy
good,
Friday.
man. Here we go. Happy Friday. We're wrapping it up, and this is an interesting email from Joe because it sort of takes a direction that you may not expect. And I do want to say that this is actually the last part of a longer email from Joe, and sat in the folder for a long time. But I thought, like, it's always going to be a relevant question.
Okay.
So have at it, my friend.
All right, so this is from Joe. Been digging into the second volume of The 50-Year Mission, which is the oral history of Star Trek. It is fascinating to see all the contradictions and revisionist history that is spun from each person's particular perspective. What I have a difficult time with, in particular, is untangling the legacy of someone like Rick Berman, someone who was an outsider to Trek when he came on board, but somehow propagated 4 entire spin-offs of some of the best Trek created. I am aware of all of the animosity that the actors, fans, and crew have towards him, and aware of some of the terrible, mean, and damaging things he did to people, but cannot seem to square that with him effectively running the entire franchise through the 90s. I know Gene had his own issues as he aged that made him far less endearing to many in the TV world, but by the time he was becoming really unpleasant to work with, he was not actually in control of much of dealing with the show. Someone like Berman was actually in the pilot seat for multiple Star Treks, and from the impression I get, was liked by a few. I would love to hear what you two and Rod would have to say about untangling a legacy like this. Is it as bad as the stories I hear make out to be? If so, why is this the most prolific period for Star Trek? Is there anything redeeming about Berman's legacy, or can we safely dispose of hanging on to his influence for the franchise? If you know of any good podcast eps, parentheses, maybe Women at Warp, on parentheses, or any books that delve into this, I would be happy to give them a try. If not, it would make for a great supplemental, especially with Rod giving his perspective on things. Anyway, keep on keeping on, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, see, that's... I almost think about this question as being parallel to something we were talking about in Bada Bing, which is how do you separate the negative and still enjoy the positive thing that brings you entertainment, you know?
Mhm.
And I want to say right up front here that I don't know Rick Berman, neither does Norman.
I do not.
And and I have to take any of these stories with a huge grain of salt because, as you point out, this is somebody who is in a position to keep Trek humming along, and very successfully so, for a very long time. It also speaks to the idea that, again, a lot of people have wrong that you have to have a Star Trek fan in control of Star Trek. No, you don't. You need it to have somebody who can produce television and who can assemble the right teams to do so. The reason that I take a lot of that stuff with a grain of salt is that you were talking about an incredibly high pressure work environment. And you have to have that handful of people at the top who are making sure that it all happens on time, that the shows get made. And in that high pressure environment, there are a lot of personalities and egos at play, and a lot of people working 16-hour days and very few breaks and trying to pull emotional content out of themselves to make for the best shows, to make for the best stories that they can tell. So whether it's, you hear something negative about Berman, or you hear something negative about Shatner or Roddenberry or whatever, again, you got to understand, just like Norm, you and I were watching What We Left Behind, they did a very effective job of saying all of these memories are totally colored by emotion and personal ego and faulty memory,
History, time.
Yeah. So you're never really going to get the definitive answer here. I certainly have no problem defending the work legacy of what people like Rick Berman and Gene Roddenberry turned out. Anytime you read a book like the 50-Year Mission, or you watch series like Center Seat, or even Chaos on the Bridge, you have to go like, okay, well, these are all tainted by memory. These are all people getting their version of the events out. Whether or not it is correct is going to be the question at the end of the day. I think Rick Berman did an outstanding job of getting those shows made and hiring people who could tell great stories.
There's a quote that I love to bring up every single time you hear kind of like the question of who are you supposed to believe. J. Michael Straczynski wrote a line in Babylon 5 for his character Jakar, and Jakar said, "Truth is a three-edged sword. Your side, their side, and the truth itself."
Yeah.
Right? So only the truth knows the truth. Right? There will always be an edge that is working against the truth for one of two purposes. One, because you don't really know the truth. Two, because you're trying to tell your own narrative. So whoever writes the book, whoever writes whoever creates the documentary, whoever creates the music, whoever creates the whatever production that you're speaking of, they are always coming from a point of their own truth. But
Yeah.
that truth isn't necessarily 100% accurate. It's only the things that they know, or only the things that they've been able to suss out from other people who believe that is the truth. You can ask somebody on the worst day of their life how they feel, and it's not how they feel. It's how they feel on the worst day of their life. You can interview somebody who had the best day ever, but is, suffering from a longevity of certain personal turmoil. So I guess it really depends on what you want to believe is true. And if you want to believe it's true, how's that going to affect your overall enjoyment of something that you absolutely love?
Yeah, and look, I'll give a shout out to Rod here because you mentioned him in your email, Joe. From the very beginning, Rod always said that like when we have guests on Mission Log or the Trek Files or whatever else, you're going to get these wildly different stories. And Rod always felt like, okay, the people who put his father on a pedestal and say he could do no wrong and he was this incredible genius versus the people who say that Gene had no idea what he was doing and he was a total mess and had all these other negative traits. He was like, neither one of those is necessarily true. Let's try to figure out what is in the middle that actually gives a sense of balance and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you get those stories, you know that, as you just said, Norman, you're getting that person's feeling right now, and you're also getting that person's feeling based on maybe a very narrow slice of where they were emotionally, where they were professionally back then doing that job or having that encounter.
Yeah, and I think one of the more important things, Joe, that's part of this equation is if you really believe that Rick Berman is this person based on what you have read, and if you've done more studying deeper into who Rick Berman really is, and you still feel that, you know what, I can't support, a franchise that has been so influenced by somebody that I despise, then
Mm.
don't support it.
Mhm.
All right, because that's the thing. If it makes you feel so in a way internalized, those feelings to a point where they really bother you, then there's so many things in the world that you can go to that probably have a better source and inspiration for you to follow that will do you better in life. I'm not saying this, I'm just kind of like over dramatizing how sometimes people feel about if they find an impurity of the source of something that they love so much, it completely ruins and taints
Mm.
that particular product or project. That may be true. That may be true. And we're not saying one way or the other. We're just saying that if you find something in your life that's worth value and it actually does come from a pure source and something that you feel is from the bottom up, from soup to nuts, is absolutely what you believe in, and it becomes a great product, then obviously that's the right direction for you. If it's not in this case because of what Rick Berman did or said or what you believe he did or said, then maybe Star Trek will be tainted in a certain way for you, and that's unfortunate. But remember, like John said, remember where the sources are coming from.
Mhm.
And remember, these are coming from emotional people, human beings, distance in time, obfuscation, interpretation, every single possible way that the truth is manipulated or obscured.
Yeah.
So,
Always going to be a very personal decision. It's like, can I enjoy the thing or is there this cloud looming over it?
mhm.
And everybody's going to land at different places depending on that thing. And look, by the way, I don't know Rick, but I've also heard very good things about him. And I thought he was very good in his interview in What We Left Behind. I wish there were more of that. And love to have him come on the show one day. Fingers
Yeah,
crossed.
absolutely. Sure.
All
Hmm.
right. So take care, everybody. Remember, you can find us. Be sure to subscribe, Mission Log Engage at youtube.com/RoddenberryProd. And send us your comments and your questions, missionlog at roddenberry.com, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at missionlogpod. And remember, we may engage with your comments on the air.